of ministers. Earlier I was saying that when I was still an international relations professor, I did quite a bit of research on the Nordic Council, which itself is a pioneering organization of the Nordic countries as an intergovernmental body. But specifically on women, when I published this article, Why Women Still Can't Have It All in 2012, it was read all over the world, indeed above the Arctic Circle. Someone sent me a little clipping from a newspaper above the Arctic Circle. And there were many countries that did not surprise me that it should be read, but I was very surprised that I got a lot of response in the different Nordic countries, because my view was, wait a minute, you all have figured this out. You know, you don't need to be reading me, we need to be reading you. And indeed, the policies in the Nordic countries on family leave, on flexibility, on child care are well ahead of where the United States is. But there is still definitely a pay gap. Women are in more of the low-paid jobs, when men more in the high jobs. But even beyond that, in the private sector, the United States actually has more women CEOs, although I think the Nordic countries as a whole have a higher average of women in management positions. So there's still gaps. There's no country, of course, that's really solved this issue. And it's why it's particularly interesting tonight to talk about a subject that I think all of us are still working on, which is the career comeback, right? How do you go from work to family and back to work again? This is something often in audiences when I speak, women say this is really a matter of ageism, that you can be an extraordinarily talented and well-educated woman, and you know, if you went to great universities, you still went to those great universities when you're 50 as when you're 35. That part of your resume didn't change. It's just, it doesn't seem to get valued so much. And if you had a lot of great experience, that doesn't matter so much. What seems to matter is that gap. So how do we reintegrate those women? Or I would ask the question a different way. How do we make sure we're not hemorrhaging talent? Because in the United States, we have millions of highly educated, talented women who are there, who have 20 years of good working life ahead of them, if we look at life expectancy, and who cannot get back in. So that's our subject for this evening. And to start, we are going to have opening remarks by Deputy Minister Laila Bakari, who is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Norway, and the acting chair of the Nordic Council, and the Nordic Council has lots of councils of ministers, the Council of Ministers for Gender Equality. Prior to her current position, she was appointed State Secretary to the Office of Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg, and so she advised on terrorism and radicalization and violence. So I'm particularly pleased to have her opening. She can tell us about ISIS, and she can talk about work-family balance, and so should it be.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And yes, there are so many issues I would like to speak about at a session like this. Thank you all for joining us this evening here. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and dear friends, let me first start with really thanking New America and the Nordic Council of Ministers for organizing this event about the career comeback. To me, it's personal. Many of us have been there, and yes, it is possible. But how do we do it? How do we make it possible to come back to careers? Now, the Nordic countries have worked together on promoting gender equality for more than 40 years. We share a vision of a Nordic region with equal opportunities, rights and obligations for all, regardless of sex and gender. Now, as you will be hearing here today, the Nordic countries have taken different paths and different policy measures towards gender equality. But the main thing is that we have all worked actively in this field to achieve results. The words career comeback trigger a whole range of questions. Why is it that women with children lose pay compared to women without children, while it is the other way around with men? Statistically, for every child a woman has, she falls behind in salary. What is the deal with this motherhood penalty, if you like? Why is it that career opportunities often coincide in time with childbirth and having small children who need their parents' time? Are we talking about doors that are closing forever if you don't walk through? Or is it actually possible to slow down and step aside for a few years, if you like, and then return to a blooming career when the children are older, if that's the path you choose? Now, in the Nordic countries, we've come a long way towards gender equality. Arguably, some would say. It is safe to say that we have pioneered gender equality in the labor market. The Nordic model has shown that equal opportunities for women and men in work life are not only a matter of rights, but it's actually the smart thing to do. So not only the right thing, it's the smart thing to do as a whole. The Nordic region is the 11th strongest economy in the world. Gender equality and women's participation on equal terms in the Nordic labor market has been a prerequisite to achieve this position. Now, we have invested in some costly welfare schemes that make it possible for both mothers and fathers to combine work and family life. Free education for all, affordable childcare, and a generous parental leave for both parents are costly investments, but they pay off. Still is gender equal, even if in this gender equal region, we have a gender pay gap ranging from 14 to 18.5%. And at the top management level of private business, there are very, very few women. In Norway, only 20% of the CEOs of the 200 largest companies are women. Only 22 of the 200 largest companies have at least 40% women in their senior management groups. Now, I, for one, am really looking forward to listening to Mari Teigen and Lynn to follow the conversation, the panel discussion that we follow. Hopefully, when we leave here tonight, we will all have got some new ideas about what both companies and governments can do better. Because one thing I think is clear: gender equality cannot be decided in government offices alone. We need to, and I hope you will agree with me on this, we need to team up with the business sector, with all of us, with society as a whole. We need to work together on this. And this is why we're here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good luck with the discussion.
All right, just so I don't play ping pong. Back and forth. Thank you. So we will have a conversation among ourselves, and then we will open it up to the audience for questions. And I want to start by introducing the rest of our panel. So immediately on my left is Marie Teigen, who is the Center for Research on Gender Equality in Oslo. As she's a past member of the Norwegian government's Equality Commission, and her research specializes on gender equality and gender quotas on corporate boards, very divisive subject often in the United States, and gender segregation in the labor market. And to her left is Lynn Roseberry, who's going to give us the Danish perspective. Lynn is a lawyer and a consultant in gender in the workforce, and has been an assistant professor at the Copenhagen Business School, and she was the Copenhagen Business School's first equal opportunity officer, and is the author of Bridging the Gender Gap. And I just have to say, you are educated at ASU, at the Arizona State.
Yeah, my JD is.
Your JD. So we New America partners with Arizona State University.
Really?
Oh yes,
Great.
so I wanted to call that out. And then finally, on my far left, physically anyway, is Jyoti Chopra, who is the managing director at BNY Mellon, which is an American worldwide banking and services corporation. She's the head of the global head of citizenship and sustainability and the chief diversity officer. I call that out just because it is 10 years ago we did not have chief diversity officers. So that's, I think, important. Jody has had a long career in professional and financial services, and she was a global executive at Deloitte before moving to BNY Mellon, and worked on the gender diversity report at Deloitte. So let me open up by asking what things you've seen tried on this question of bringing people back in. When people ask me, I often talk about returnships, but that's about my only answer. The returnships meaning bringing people back in, off of parents, typically mothers, like internships, returnships, sort of the role that Bob De Niro played in The Intern. If anybody saw that. But what have you seen tried? And whether private or public, and what works?
So one of the models that I've seen that's actually been very successful in the professional services field is alumni networks. So at Deloitte, for example, they maintain very robust networks of people that have worked at the firm, left for whatever reasons. They organize reunions, they bring them back, they stay connected, they have regular cadence of communications, and they actively stay in touch, and they often re-recruit back. So that's one of the mechanisms that I've seen in the private sector.
Yeah, I think it's not so easy to answer that question from a Norwegian perspective.
Because people don't leave.
No, we don't leave. Because and there's several reasons for that. I mean, one reason is that we have a very strong anti-discrimination legislation that is particularly strong when it comes to pregnancy and parental leave discrimination. So that's one reason why we don't have very big problems with this. The other thing is that we actually have long parental leave arrangements, 49 weeks full payment for the mother and the father together. And what we actually see is that the employment rates of women with small children is the same as the average employment rate. When you look at mothers with children above 3 years old, 3 to 6 years old, it's even higher than the average. So the women who are not the least working is in fact the oldest women. So in that respect, when it comes to general gender equality issues in the Norwegian society, we have in a way overcome this problem. But we have issues concerned with motherhood when it comes to the gender pay gap, when it comes to mobility between the private and the public sector, and also when it comes to top management.
So let me ask the question in a different way, because you're exactly right. In the United States, because we make it so hard for parents, and then often the burden falls more on the mother, depending on how the couple works it out, you're more likely to see women either work part-time when they have children or stop working if they can afford to do that. And many women who work part-time say they get paid part-time for a full-time job, and that doesn't seem fair. And so they have to get back in. In Norway, that would be less true. They don't have to get back in. But isn't it likely that they are less likely to be considered for promotion to the top jobs? So let me ask you, how do you tackle that one? Because the bottom line's the same. We don't have enough women at the top because they thin out.
Yeah, so that's exactly my point, that we still have the problem, but we have it in a more specific way. So we have, for example, when you look at, we did a survey among top managers in Norwegian business life. When you look at their situation, I mean, it's really very few women at the top. And it's 20% women in executive committees. It's even fewer when you look at the CEOs. But what we see is that the family situation of the men and women in these top positions, those few who has managed it, are very different. The women are more often single, more often divorced. If they have children, they have only one child. And their husband, if they have a husband, he works full-time or more than full-time or more than she. But the men in these top positions, they more often have wives that are working reduced hours or not at all. So, I mean, the situation is very different, and that is, of course, a part of the explanations for why there's so few women in top positions.
So I will definitely come back to that. But I want to talk to Lynn. I was just going to say that sounds a little bit like the plot line of Borgen, but if any of you have. So Lynn, talk about what you see in Denmark.
Yeah, well, it's very similar, and I would say the problem is really, it's not about returning. There's an expectation that women go back to work when maternity leave is over, so it's not unusual at all. What you see, though, is that women who've been in, for example, if they're lawyers in private practice, they may go back to the public sector. Mm-hmm. So the public sector is very heavily female-dominated because it has regular hours and very uniform policies on maternity leave. So what I do see in the companies that are working on this problem, and it's not very many, I have to say, because we believe we have gender equality in Denmark, and so employers don't think that they need to do anything. But I have to say that there are a few that are doing something, and what they're doing is focusing on the conversations they have with women and men before they have children, before they take their leave, on what their expectations are for when they come back. And this is something that they're picking up actually from the United Kingdom and picking up from companies in the United States. So in some ways, Denmark is actually behind many of the big companies in the U.S. The whole idea of having a diversity manager is new there. And the international companies that have headquarters in the United States, like Microsoft and IBM, they have diversity managers. You go out to other Danish companies and you tell them something like that, and they go, "What? What's that?" So so the focus is on having conversations before they come back and after they come back, but it is definitely a problem.
So actually, Jyoti, that's a great place to ask you. Maybe you want to describe what you do as a chief diversity officer, to sort of widen this up.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I have responsibility for diversity hiring, talent mobility, diversity education, training, leadership development. I oversee our employee resource groups or business resource groups, which fuel a lot of our inclusive programs. And I'm responsible for our partnerships in the marketplace with diverse organizations. And so in a nutshell, that's the role. You see variations of it by company. We've purposefully taken a very holistic approach to diversity. So our strategy really pivots on three areas: workforce, workplace, marketplace. And so we go at this across all three areas and all three dimensions in order to affect change. And I'll give you an example of a couple of the things that we do very practically to address opportunities. Succession is one. What I've tried to do is really embed diversity and inclusion practices systematically throughout the entire talent life cycle. So whether you're thinking about how do you source talent, how do you recruit, how do you promote, developing succession benches. So we have, for example, our top several hundred jobs, we have succession benches for all of them. We make sure we have women and diverse talent on as many of those benches as possible. And that's how you begin to build a pipeline and begin to affect change. But it has to be systematic, enterprise-wide, and globally nuanced.
And would your portfolio include the kind of conversations that Lynn described, that making sure people are having conversations as parents take their leave? What are you thinking about coming back? And also with managers, because yes. I've found even there is, at least I have found even in my own workforce, when people have children, and we have great, as you might expect, benefits, and I do, I have to stop myself from thinking, I wonder if he or she, and it's more often the she, but even the he, will want to travel as much, right? And then I think to myself, that is not my call. That is that person's call. I never stop. But do you work with people to do that?
We do. So the manager training that you've touched on is absolutely key. We have about 9,000 managers. And if you think about it, we call this the mushy middle, because this is where the bulk of the decisions around hiring, promotions, et cetera, get made. And we have been myopically focused on that population within the company and training them and sensitizing them. And that's where the accountability occurs. And you're absolutely right. You have to be having those conversations and staying close to your talent as part of the retention strategy.
Yeah. So we've heard a number of different things that can block. I want to come back, Marie, to your point, because I think it's a tricky one. It's one I often raise, and lots of people get very uncomfortable when I do, which is, you said, and I see this all the time. You go to a conference of male business leaders, and you look around, and it is the rare situation where you find a male CEO who is married to a man or a woman who is in an equally high-powered job. It's very rare. I can't think of an example, maybe one or two. But of course, so generally, a man who is in a high-powered position that requires him to be on a plane all the time and be in meetings and assumes someone else in his household is going to be at the parent-teacher meeting, or when the child gets sick is going to cancel her day or his day. But the rhythms of caregiving are not forgiving. Right? They are unpredictable. They happen invariably when you have an important meeting. That is the day your child will get sick. Depend on it, right? So men, when we look at men in those positions, we assume they are going to be partnered with a principal caregiver. Let's put it in gender-neutral terms. When we look at women in those positions, even among us women, there's much less comfort with the idea, well, I couldn't be sitting here if my husband weren't lead parent. That gets to issues of masculinity. It gets to what women want out of men as well as what men expect. And yet, to me, it's pretty obvious that if you want the same number of women at the top, they're going to have people supporting them, if they're going to have families, as men have women. It's just the math. Right? There'll be a few who can do it all remarkably and run an entire stable of help of various kinds. But how much does that issue come up? Because it seems to me essential if we're really serious about this.
Yeah, I think it's a central issue. But I also think that I know there's one Norwegian person in the audience which probably knows much more about this than me. But I think I think the business life has some particular problems, because what we see is that the percentage of women in top management positions within the other sectors of the Norwegian society is increasing much more than in the business life. So in these other sectors, there must be so that the two partners in a relationship are able to share who goes to parents' meeting, who goes to or go home when the child is sick. I actually think that
there's an in-between way.
Yeah, and I think the business life. I think it's tougher. I think it's more traveling. It's more longer hours, but it's also some kind of a cultural change that is needed in the business life, because I think people actually manage this in other sectors.
Jyoti, are you seeing that for men as well as women? And
yeah, I would agree. I do think that is the case, very much so. Yeah.
But do you find these are tricky conversations to have. But do they get raised in
corporate America?
Yeah.
They do, in different ways. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's through employee relations, sometimes it's through memos. You do get issues raised around that at times. Yeah.
Lynn?
Yeah, well, I've had some very interesting conversations with managers of various kinds in different sectors in Denmark. And most of them are about how, I'm talking to a male manager, and he'll say something like, well, you know, I'm here because I had my bagland. In Danish, that means my back country. The backside is covered. And by that he means I've got everything under control at home. And the expectation is that men will have that. And then the next thing is, I don't understand how women can do that, because I don't understand that. And I just don't see how that's going to happen. I've had this conversation so many times with male managers. Then I've spoken to very few people at the top or close to the top who say, this is, in their opinion, they're exaggerating the amount of time that it is involved, and that actually they have far more flexibility at the top than when you're first starting out. And so there's a kind of macho thing about, I look at all the number of hours I work and how busy I am and all these things I'm doing. And if you talk to a few people who are really honest, women or men, and they'll say, you know, actually it's easier once you get to the top. And we've got to start saying that out loud.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's certainly true. Sheryl Sandberg says that in Lean In, and I mean, she's absolutely right. If you can be at the top in your late 30s, I certainly found as dean, I could tell everybody we're going home at 6 o'clock, because I'm going home at 6 o'clock, and I'll come back to work at 8 o'clock. But that's certainly true. It's just very, very hard to do. But I hadn't thought that to make that point implies. If you're in a culture of the whole point is to say you're working all the time, that wouldn't work. But I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at Bridget Schulte, who is the head of our Better Life Lab, because in her book Overwhelmed, she wrote all about the Danish concept of hygge. Did I pronounce it remotely right? Close. Which is supposedly, it's supposed to be a less workaholic culture in various ways. I mean, I always think of Nordic culture as less workaholic.
But I actually think that...
That wasn't an overwhelming assent there.
I'm always wondering how people work in the work cultures, because my impression is that people work quite
very
a lot.
hard.
Yeah. And maybe more in the business sector than other sectors, but I'm not sure, because, I mean, in politics we have 40% women in parliaments and government, and I'm quite sure that you work pretty hard.
The world does not wait on your schedule. That's certainly true.
But isn't there also an inherent responsibility for people to put parameters and boundaries around what they're willing to do and not willing to do, and when they're going to be accessible and not? And I think part of that is our responsibility to just bring people along on that journey. It's okay to say, you know what, Friday afternoon I'm not available. I'm, at a soccer game, etc. And I think people have to get over this and begin to sort of draw some of those boundaries, especially in this age of 24/7.
I think that's right, and that you can create a kind of counter culture where the person who says, look, I am able to set limits. That's a sign of discipline and control and prioritizing. If you think about what we emphasize for effective work habits, no one can ever get their whole list done. We want people who can focus and say, these are the things I have to get done, and get them done, who knows how to recharge, or at least in the company that I'm on the board of, knowing how to, at least enough self-care so you don't burn out, is an important thing that we look for in an employee. So maybe you can sort of tweak that particular culture.
Yeah.
I want to ask about government and corporate policies, but anything else on just sort of general changes in work culture that would, I guess I would come back to the point we were having about, do you need, if you're going to have women at the top, do they need men to support them or other women to support them in the same way men traditionally have had? And what I heard you all saying was, that may be pushing too far, but maybe we can make it so there can be a more equal split, and people can set, we can change work habits to make that possible.
I would say that I think perhaps the work-life culture in Scandinavia is more relaxed than in the United States. There isn't, I mean, we have much more vacation days.
Yes.
And I've talked to a lot of people who come to Denmark from other countries, including American. They're shocked when most people leave the office around 4 o'clock. Why do they do that? They're going to pick up their kids from daycare.
Yeah.
And they assume that then they don't work at night, but they do. So I think a big part of the problem here is that a lot of the men in these positions have not had responsibility for taking care of the home and the children. So they exaggerate in their minds how much time it takes. And they just don't understand that it is possible to do those two things.
The only other point I'd make, and it's more of an observation, is I do think it's increasingly important, particularly for women as they rise up into the ranks and into more senior roles, to have this cadre of what I'd call a personal board of directors, the sort of trusted group of advisors, counselors, people that you can turn to when you need to pinch hit or troubleshoot or problem solve or you need a sounding board. And that's yet a different form of a support mechanism, but one I think that's often overlooked, but I think becomes increasingly vital as you sort of rise up the ranks.
That's interesting. All right.
Yeah, I was just, I'm not sure whether you come back to age, but I also think it's a question on in which age do you need to do the careers, or do we need to be 30 when we get children and the career takes off and everything? I mean, many of us are meant to work till we are 70. So, I mean, it's, yeah. So it's also a question about, do everything have to happen in the same time? Because few of us are parents of small children the whole life. So,
Well, at least physically they're not small children. No, yes, but I think, and you're right. Part of these shifts in work culture are to assume, yes, you're working. I mean, my view is I want you to get your work done, and I really don't care where you get it done. There are meetings you have to be at, but I want you to get it done. And I know absolutely you can go home, you can be with your children, you can put them to bed, or when the teenagers, they don't want to see you anyway, and you can still. You can still work. So there's that. There's sort of the work culture around, well, wait a minute, what matters is when you get it done. There are the idea that you're just more productive if you have time off in your life. And also that we have to somehow find a way so that the idea that somebody getting promoted to, a position that normally you'd hold at 40, at 50, as long as you're still doing the work and you've got, that ahead of you, why not? I mean, in every other area of life, we say, 50 is the new 40.
So on that point, I often sort of advocate to think about your careers as sort of a lattice, which is you can go up, down, vertical, horizontal, and you can ramp up or dial back down depending on the stage that you're at. For example, when my son was young, I was in a job that didn't require a lot of travel, and as he grew older and I was able to travel more and had more flexibility, I was able to do that. And to your point just now about 50 being the new 40, I just went back to school. I've always wanted to do an MBA. At mid-career professional, people probably thought I was crazy, but I literally just finished my MBA. And so you can. Now I had to thank you. I did it while I was working full-time, and I did it transatlantic. Well, that's a whole other story, but if anybody wants to talk to me, it can be done, and you can do it. But the point being that there are times in your life where you decide when it's right for you, and you want to invest in your career, and you want to make some strategic decisions, and it starts with a plan, and you have to sketch out a plan for yourself and build a roadmap, just as you would a business plan, just as you would anything else you do in your professional lives. And so that's sort of something that I would advocate.
That's great. And I would say demographics are with you. I mean, as someone who's at the bulge of the baby boom in this country, as my generation, ages and doesn't want to retire or can't afford to retire, but also lifelong education and training, that's going to become more and more the norm. So that should be exactly right, and then you should be considered for whatever you're ready for. So let's turn to the question of what's the mix of government and private sector solutions here. So, the cliche is, well, in the United States, we would expect to see the private sector taking the lead. In Nordic countries, we'd expect to see government taking the lead. But I wonder if you have examples of how the two can really work together, where a well-chosen policy or a law creates, either levels the playing field in some cases among companies, or where from the corporate side actually can help something that the corporation is trying to do, because this is an interesting piece of this puzzle. Maria, I'll start with you.
My first part of the answer to that question would be that I think this is really one of the big challenges for at least the Norwegian society, and I guess also the Nordic countries, that there's too little cooperation. But I have one, I think, really good example, and that was when we introduced a corporate board for gender quotas for corporate boards, because the Federation for the Enterprises, which is the big employers organization, they were very much against gender quotas for corporate boards, but simultaneously they started a big program called the Female Future Program, to make competent women more competent to sit in boards and to be motivated to do board work, etc. So I mean, they although they were against legislation, they worked together to make it work. So that was one example, but yeah.
So it worked in both cases. They reinforce each other.
Yeah,
Yep.
they did. So that's yeah. But except from that, I think we are working with the tripartite cooperation with the social partners and the state. But I think the business life needs to be more part of this. But yeah, it has to do with the kind of politics. I mean, it's so much family policies that are used to facilitate gender equality. Interesting question.
Thank you. Lynn.
Yeah, well, where to start with that? I have to say that, I mean, on this particular issue of women leadership, I think we have to remind ourselves that the United States is actually doing better than Scandinavia. So I'm not going to say that we do this better at all. What I do think is really obvious to me is that the Nordics are scoring so high on gender equality because women have universal health care, they have access to very affordable contraception, safe abortion, and wide availability of both child care from ages 1 to they go to school, and then they have before school and after school care available. So women are able to control when they have children, and once they have children, there are places they can get help to care for them. So once you have
And
that,
that's all government.
That's all
government.
government. That's all government. And it made a huge difference. Okay, the very high labor market participation happened after the introduction of widely available daycare. And there was a big take-up of it by all women. As soon as maternity leave is over, they go back to work because they know their kids are taken care of. Now, the next stage then is this leadership piece. And to work with employers on this, I think it's very difficult to legislate because there's so many little management tricks you have to do, like having a diversity manager, diversity task force, making sure that you do things that limit unconscious bias in your hiring and recruitment and promotion procedures, that you just can't put that into legislation. But I think there's I'm hopeful that maybe Iceland will be showing us a new way to approach these issues. And as the equality minister from Iceland today at the panel at the UN that we participated in, there are the Nordics are the leaders. They don't have anyone to follow, so they've got to try some new things. And what they're trying is an equal pay standard modeled on the ISO standards. I'm not sure if you're aware of what those are, but those are used for all kinds of things, including standardizing approaches to corporate social responsibility, all kinds of things.
Or environmental quality.
Or environmental
Yeah,
quality,
exactly.
yep. And this was negotiated with the trade unions on one side, the employer organizations on the other, and the first part of it is to make it a voluntary certification system for equal pay. Okay, so the certification system goes through a list of things they have to do and how to evaluate work, and this is now going to be made compulsory. It's going to be legislated and adopted by Iceland as requirement for companies in Iceland to do. I think this is really interesting that you start out with this certification system. And this is, I think it responds to a very big need on the part of employers. What I hear from employers is, yes, we know we have a problem, but we don't know what to do. Okay, well, let's sit down and talk about that. What can you do? Let's see, can we make a standard to help you direct your activities in a productive way? In Denmark, we use a certification system to show that some products are greener, more environmentally protective than others. And by doing that, they put environmentally responsible products on the agenda in a completely new way. And it had a huge impact on consumer behavior and marketing and product behavior. So I think that particular approach, I think in this area when you're trying to deal with companies and trying to shape behavior, and this goes for the educational system too, we have to think in terms of incentives, in terms of making information available. So there is something like a certification for gender equality for companies that was started by the daughter of Charles Schwab, who started the World Economic Forum. It's called EDGE. And it seems like a very good certification program. The problem is it's private, and what they're certifying and what they're doing isn't available unless you pay to play.
Right.
And that is just not going to have the impact we need to see. We need to make this available broadly. And we have now the research showing what it is actually we need to do. And a lot of the things that Jody's talking about has been shown to be effective. There's evidence showing that it has an impact.
So we have an example of a government policy and then a sort of private, the organization of companies offering a kind of self-regulation or something voluntarily. You have tremendous government provision of services and policies, and then a standard, a voluntary standard. So that's those two different models of public and private. Jody, from where you sit, are there things the government could do that would make what you're trying to do better, that business would support?
Yeah, so the starting point for us is the basic core of public policy. As a corporation, for example, we have to adhere to various standards, rules, regulations, et cetera, but that's sort of the baseline. I think employee engagement is a big driver for us. So, for example, we've just introduced a global well-being initiative. At the financial, social, emotional, physical well-being of our employees and what are their needs and requirements around that, and offering sort of support mechanisms around that. And that's just something that we've instituted, we've launched, and we're making available to all 50,000 of our employees. So that's one example. But coming back to some of the points that Lynn made around opportunities, we've just released a report, and actually we have a few copies outside. This was done in partnership with the UN Foundation. It's called Return on Equality that we launched at Davos. But basically it makes the case for having a product and service investing. So to answer your question around what can governments do, it's really looking at a variety of mechanisms and investing in organizations and companies that are developing products and services that free up the economic capacity and capability of women around the world. I mean, in this report, we've just looked at 5 sectors like telecommunications, contraception, energy, and have quantified the market potential if women were to be freed up from things like having to go and collect water, as an example. And it's tremendous. It's hundreds of billions of dollars. And so there's an incredible amount that both, I think, the governments and the private sector can do through collaborative private-public partnerships.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn it to the audience, but I have a special treat, actually. Before we turn it to questions, I'm going to welcome Minister Karen Elleman to the stage, actually. I think we're about to provide her a chair. So Minister Elleman is actually is Minister of Equality and of Nordic Cooperation for the Kingdom of Denmark. So I'm going to hear from both the Swedes and the Finns, I have a feeling, in terms of the Nordic Council, but the Norwegians and the Danish perspectives are well represented, and she's come directly from the United Kingdom just to be here. I'm sorry, from the United Nations, not the United Kingdom. Yes, that too. But so welcome, and let me ask you. I mean, you're the Minister of Equality. How do you think about equality when you just kind of look at where are you trying to get?
I'm trying to get there where it's really necessary that we emphasize that we have equal opportunities in our country. That's why, honestly, my title in English, I've had some debate with my staff, because instead of saying Minister of Gender Equality, I was going to say I'm Minister of Equal Opportunities. It's a very strong value in our country, and we have it through legislation where we have, the debate on equal pay for equal work, even though we have a wage gap. I'm totally aware of that. But you talk about the Nordic welfare model, and we are very similar in the Nordic countries when we talk about our values, but we look into the field with different tools, dealing with the whole parental leave scheme and the whole support for daycare for children, and also for elder care. So that whole welfare system, tax financed, is something I know that many Americans look upon, and some of them get very scared and call us socialists. Don't be scared, because it really works. And it's not that I'm extremely fond of paying extremely high taxes, but when I look into the possibilities and the safeguard it provides, it's very unique, and it's something that we really need to manage, to take care of, and to really insist on the debate continuously when it comes to equal opportunities, because we do have problems, especially women who mainly takes the whole parental leave, even though men can take it as well. We have debates on quotas. Personally, I'm not fond of the quota system. We have some quotas on it, but mainly it's something for the families to decide. So what we do is really try to emphasize for the husbands, for the fathers, for the young fathers, take your part of the parental leave. It's good for you, it's good for your child, it's good for the mom, and it's good for the business. So that kind of a four-win, I mean, it's even more than a Kinder Egg, right? It's four advantages. So emphasizing that is something that's, I mean, it's on the go. We're not there yet, and it's not that parents really split it 50-50, but we do see an increase that fathers do take their share of the parental leaves, and they, I mean, the companies, we do showcase the companies that support that.
So I have to ask you, and perhaps in the question and answer period we can hear from other answers, but I listened to you, and I listened to what sounds honestly like paradise in the sense of just how much support there is for family. I mean, it's not that we all have countries with different issues, but I wonder to myself, is it because there were so many women in government that we rolled out these policies,
Or did all these policies allow there to be so much women in government, so many women in government?
Huh.
Right? And so obviously a bit of both, but as you account for it, because you know, it is exactly what I would assume if you had a really broad representation of women and men, a lot of these issues would be much more. But how do you see it? What came first?
I'm born in '69, and my parents were divorced when I was one year and a half. So I was raised by my mom, single mom, 2 kids, hardworking woman, and I mean, we today, we have to be aware that we stand on the shoulders of some really, really strong women who fought for us, for these equal opportunities that we do have today. But also on some politicians way back, men as well. I mean, back there, it's not more than 100 years ago in Denmark that women got the possibility to vote and to be elected. So it's only 100 years ago. It's not that much. So of course the whole entry to the paid labor market. I mean, women always worked. Remember that. So
Yes.
So that's I mean, that's what happened. And is it paradise? I mean, it's yes, we are very happy, and we are very we basically trust the system. Of course, there are challenges, right? But I mean, when I give birth to my children, of course I put them into the kindergarten or to the daycare center because I felt safe.
Yeah.
So of course I did that, and of course their father took his share of parental leave, and we split it, and we had that conversation about how can you make your career, how can I make my career, and for my family, it's something natural, but it's not natural for every single family. And it's still a fight for the men and the women to have that kind of look into the chores, into the family chores and the household chores, and finding out how to split it, how to make it work. And those conversations is something that you need to insist on having, both in the private home, but also in the companies.
Yes, exactly.
And the companies supporting the men to actually take their part of parental leave. Those, we really put focus on them because they need to be the carriers of that kind of change we need to see more of.
That's great. So Mara, you wanted to add, and cue your questions. They're going to be roving mics, and we'll take a couple at a time. So
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's really a good question about, does it matter with women in politics? Did it come first, or
did women in politics come first, or did those care policies?
Did they come into politics because they had parental leave and so on? No, they actually mostly came in to politics before that, and they are actually quite important for why we have generous parental leave in the Nordic countries, and quite a good common kindergartens and publicly subsidized kindergartens and so on. Because, I mean, political scientists have discussed always this substantive representation. Does it matter with women in politics? And in many types of issues, it doesn't matter so much. At least I think in our party systems, party matters more than gender. But when it comes to these issues about family politics, I actually think that high representation of women have been quite important.
Thank you. We see that here too. Okay, there was one on the aisle there. The gentleman halfway down. Right there. Yes.
I'm underrepresented this evening. My name is Peter Burgess. The reason that men take so much time is golf is a very slow game. But seriously, the one piece of this that you haven't talked about is the issue of how we report, the metrics that we use. Profit is the way in which we succeed. Wealth is the way we measure success. Yet, building a good family, the measures for that don't exist. And I would argue, until we actually put measures that really matter in play, women are going to struggle. Families are going to struggle.
Okay, hold one of you. I'm going to expect at least one of you to answer that question, but there's a question down here, all the way over.
Hi, my name is Jacob, and I'm the youth delegate in the Norwegian delegation for gender equality. And I was just wondering, so in the Norwegian media, there's been some people voicing the idea of maybe not tying the parental leave to employment. Perhaps it's better. We know it's better biologically to have children early, perhaps in your early 20s. I was just wondering, is it perhaps better for the career comeback to enable couples to have children while in college or doing their in grad school? Is that a way forward?
Okay, so we'll hold that. I have some thoughts on that particular one. Yes, okay, yes, please.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm a lawyer. This is Ella. And we've talked a lot today about equality in the workplace, equality at home, and how we structure those institutions to enable mothers to fill their potential. And I guess a third arena that I'm interested in and trying to solve at the moment is looking at intellectual spaces like these and how to include mothers and new fathers in those. So, you know, it wasn't a surprise to me that mine was the only baby in the room today due to a childcare blip. But something that I'm thinking about is, you know, how do we get those voices at their prime when they're in it and they have the feedback and welcome them into thought leadership and discussion and debate and learning so that we can capture that and use it to help inform the solution, and whether any of you had thoughts on that.
That's great.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have 3 questions. I'll then take another 3. I'll remind you, we had a question about metrics and what we value and how do we value something that we actually resist attaching any monetary value to for good reasons. A question about when you should have children, and would it make sense not to tie it to work and have it earlier, and a question about how we engage exactly those young parents who are in the midst of it. I'll just say I remember Martha Minow, who is now the dean of the Harvard Law School, and who has written on family law and other wonderful things, and is just a spectacular person. And I remember this was back in the late 1990s, watching her teach a class, and a young mother in the front had a baby, and the baby started to fuss, and Martha, without missing a beat, picked up the baby, put it on her shoulder, and just kept on lecturing. And it was such a human thing. I mean, babies, children, for most of our history, we've actually had them underfoot, literally, just as we've had older people, right? I mean, this kind of weirdly segregated world where we see people only between the ages of, whatever, 15 and you know, some point when they're older, just seems to me very, very odd. But let me start with the minister, and we'll come down this way.
Well, I like that picture because sometimes, you know, when we talk about the child care support, I also actually look into what you started about, saying measures that matter, because we sometimes have a worry that the children spend too much of their childhood in an institution, and where is the contact with their parents? And I can definitely recognize that kind of dilemma, that you want to be in the workforce and at the same time you want to be a family with all that value a good family life has. And how do you put that into measure? Well, what we can see is that the number of divorces, the number of people going down with stress-related symptoms and not being able to actually manage heavy working hours and children in institutions and stressed lives. That is something that's really costly, not only for human beings, but also financially for our societies. So managing the work-life balance and accepting that at some points in your life, you might want to work less than full-time, being more flexible, accepting that. And we do see lots of examples of actually parental leave being put into smaller pieces for families. It's really important for me as a minister to work towards making that kind of flexibility in the parental leave schemes. So so actually you see examples of companies where, for instance, the mom or the dad is in the middle of a project, for instance, and cannot really see into that. I shouldn't be in the company now for 3 months or for 6 months, but maybe I could be here like 2 or 3 days a week, and then 2 or 3 days a week I'm full-time on parental leave. So that kind of flexibility is something that I really support when the companies provide that kind of flexibility. Earlier parents or young parents, but you're totally right biologically. Look into the figures again, because what does it mean for the child and what are the risks if you bear children at a very later stage? And in Denmark, we provide actually quite good support for while you're a student, you know, the scheme for actually having the children. We even had a campaign, you remember that one? We had a campaign in the Copenhagen community where they actually encouraged the young people, please go and have your children now. I tell you, that was a big debate. But I thought it was
As
it
the
was
mother
wise.
of 2 teenage or young 20s boys.
And then, Sarah, talking about the intellectual forum, and I mean, on March the 8th, I spent my day in some of the very male-dominated companies in Denmark, because I wanted to meet the young fathers and talk to them about parental leave, and I also talked a lot with the senior employees, and they were really encouraging the young men to take part of their parental leave, and some of the young dads, or dads to be, honestly, they said, but I'm a bit scared that I will be bored when I'm on parental leave. I know that of course, I get a connection to my child, and I get a better sense of having the family up and going, but I'm scared that I'll be bored, because who am I going to talk to? And we have a very strong, you know, not a framework, but a very strong tradition of these mother groups. They're normally called mother groups, but now father groups are evolving, and having, you know, the possibility to actually, and you were talking about the intellectual forum, but I also think it's very important to have the forum where you actually meet with other, like, I mean, in the similar situation. So that would be just a few of the comments.
So we don't all have to answer all 3 questions. If you have specific things you want to add, go ahead, and then we'll have another round.
I'll just make a brief comment in response to Peter's question around metrics. So from a private sector corporate perspective, what we look at are things like, for example, employee engagement, employee retention, because those are critical from a measurement perspective in terms of the gauge of the heartbeat of the company. And we actually report on metrics like that to the board of directors. We look at workforce representation levels. We look at a very granular level at hiring details, who's coming. So it gives you a picture of who's coming into the organization, what does the organization look like, who's leaving the organization. So those are just some additional measures that we look at.
I'll just say one last thing on the metrics. You can also change the culture. I had a Finnish CEO say to me that now when he interviews young fathers, if they didn't take their parental leave, he's much less likely to hire them, as I would feel, because it says something about somebody's character that they have children as a father, and they have the chance to bond with their children and support their partner, and they don't take it. And you can do a lot. We as human beings, we respond to those social cues. We know what is valued and what is not. We know if the person who works 20 out of 24 hours is seen as the up-and-coming person, that's what you do. But if you take my view and say, well, in the first place, you're dull because you do nothing but work, and you can't set priorities, and what about your responsibilities to those you love? That's part of what makes a great human being. I think we can send those signals too. Another round of questions here, down in the front.
Hi, my name is Sharon Shehaver, and I recently left Deloitte to join a small company that allows a lot of the new mothers, and I'm an early parent myself. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home, thanks to my husband. And I found it appealing that this company allowed a lot of mothers to work on a kind of a 30-hour, 20-hour basis. But since joining a couple months ago, so many leaders of that company have told me, oh, I'm so glad you're full-time because you are dedicated, you're available whenever. So I realized that there's an internal bias, although this company touts itself as a flexible company. So now I can't tell you what company I work for. But my question is, I have never considered the career comeback as an option because I'm ambitious. I have ambitions to be at the C-suite, so I don't want to opt out. So I'm one of those people that I'm not going to take myself out, and now I'm hesitant to even go the 30-hour route because what I've heard from my own leadership. So if you were my mentor, what piece of advice would you give me as the most critical thing in making that decision, whether or not to go out and spend more time with my children when they're 1 and 3?
So Jyoti, she's already taken your view of having a personal board of directors, and she's just colonized the group. So hold that thought, because I'm certain people have views.
Got one right here.
Somewhere in the back.
Yep, right
there.
here.
Yes, way in the back.
Like Anne-Marie, I'm a big fan of Borgen, the Danish political drama, and I've been wondering a lot watching it. And you've touched on this. How the Scandinavian countries were so successful in getting so many women into politics. And I wonder, I can't help wondering if it's something about the parliamentary system, if that perhaps lowers the barriers to entry that we have here in the States. And, are we just out of luck for not having that system in place? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That's a great question. And for those of you who don't know, West Wing is the United States' Borgen. So one more question here. Down here.
Hello, I'm Heli Järvinen from Finland. Maybe I can represent also Sweden, who is absent from the panel.
Iceland, I guess.
That's true that we have guaranteed daycare system, we have education for free, but I'm sorry to say we are not a paradise. I can say one reason for that, a gender pay gap, which you can see here in my pocket. This is €1 for a woman. It's only 83 cents in Finland. And we have several researches. One of the biggest reasons is that women are the ones keeping parental leaves. In Finland, men keep less than 10% of all parental leaves, while in Sweden, men keep about 25%. And there are 3 reasons for this. First of all, in Sweden, men have bigger quotas. Second, parental leaves in Sweden are...
A quota meaning they have to take it or you lose it.
Yeah. Parental leaves in Sweden are much more flexible than in Finland. In Finland, we have to keep them until the child is 3 years old. In Sweden, until the child is in school. The third reason, but not the least, is that in Sweden, all the enterprises pay equally to a fund which pays money back to those enterprises where employees get children. In Finland, a big part of costs is paid by those entrepreneurs who have women who have children. And that's the question of not attitude, it's a question of money and the system. I wouldn't blame men for not to keep parental leaves. I blame the system. And that's why I would like to ask you from Norway and Denmark, how would you like to divide the costs of parental leaves so that we could, and the entrepreneurs could encourage all the parents, even men, to keep as much parental leaves as possible?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, 3 great questions, and we'll just have time for these, and then I'm keeping everybody on time because some of us, including me, have to make difficult travel plans with the blizzard coming. But so we have a personal question, exactly what would you do there? A question about parliamentary systems and more women. And a wonderful question about what would you do with parental leave to really shift the burden, or not the burden, but the distribution to men. And thank you very much also for the information. This way, well, let me start with Mari, and we'll go down to the minister.
I have a comment on parliamentary system. I think that the type of election system that characterized the Nordic countries with multi-party system is a very important explanation for why we raised the proportion of women in the 1970s and 80s, because something happened, was kind of a party competition between the parties for the women votes, and this was really important for why most of the countries reached 40%. Yeah, I think it's really, I'm not sure if I got you all on the division on parental leave, but I think it's really an important decision about what kind of incentive structures we have in the parental system, leave system. And if we want more equal distribution of fathers and mothers in the parental leave system, we have to rethink the incentive structure, because I think that would be really good for the children and for gender equality.
Well, for the moment, actually, a parliamentary system in the United States sounds like paradise to me,
Yeah.
too. Lynn, go ahead.
Well, first to your question, I would just say that you do what you feel is right, and you follow your passion, and I wouldn't sacrifice your dreams for staying home with your children because other people are telling you should do that. No way. And then on the parental leave question, well, I personally think that we're not going to have gender equality until both men and women take equal shares of parental leave. That's very clear to me. That's the end goal. And they should both have the same kind of compensation. The problem in all the Nordic countries, and especially in Denmark, and I would imagine also in Finland, is that men are concentrated in the more higher-paying jobs, and women are concentrated in lower-paying jobs. And when you make it optional, what's the rational choice? The women take most of the leave. So again, it's the incentive structures and how you work with that. So I'm personally in favor of earmarking leave for men. And then as far as the equal pay thing, I'm not sure you should be too depressed about Finland, because the last time I checked, Sweden and Denmark were ranked way below on the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index for income equality. Denmark is ranked 29 and Sweden is ranked 35. That's pretty shocking for the Scandinavian countries.
All right, Jyoti.
I'll just a comment on the personal question. I would say be authentic and think about what matters to you on a personal level, and to take a slightly longer term view. I mean, in today's world, careers can span 30 to 40 years. And so if you feel that you want to be with your children now, and they're not going to be 1 and 3 for very long, it's okay. It's okay to take a little bit of time off or to take a sabbatical and do that. And then ramp back up. And I go back to this sort of lattice model that actually emanated from Deloitte, which is you can dial back down, you can dial up or dial down depending on where you are at what stage. But think that you've got a long horizon, and you can always come back and ramp up. But this time in your life will not always be there. You don't ever want to have any regrets. And I'd say at the end of the day, it's really a personal decision in terms of what really matters to you and where does your heart tell you to be.
I would add, I like lattice and I like interval training, right? So when we want to be in the best of shape, we go hard and then we slow down and we go hard again. And I think it's important to say you can be extremely ambitious, but be ambitious for the kind of parent you want to be too. So, Minister, you have the last.
That would be my point of that as well. But saying yes sometimes means that you have to say no on the other end. So you will always be in that dilemma. And the worst thing you can do is to take a whip and whip yourself on your choices. I mean, be aware of the choices you make, and don't have a bad conscience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most important, and I really like the going up and down. And I think it's very important for whenever, whether it's the mother or the father who takes the parental leave, don't leave the company.
Yeah.
I mean, give them the sense that right now I have an assignment here at home, I'm on parental leave, but I miss you, colleagues, and I do pay attention and I do care what's going on in business. So you're not just totally off, because then you get all the stories that, oh yeah, well, she's just, I don't know, there's a terrible Danish word that you say you have a breastfeed brain.
Yeah.
So it's like, whoa, totally gone. And that's not very flattering. So, but also, I mean, we often have this debate on the quotas and how to get that division of the parental leave. And what is extremely important is also that it's no, I forgot that one. Anyway, the gender, no, the parliamentary system. I think you touched upon it, Mary, that our parties, several party system, each party really tries very hard to encourage women to run for office. I mean, we all have programs for encouraging, and it's really a discussion. Do I really want to do that? I remember when I started 10 years ago, you know, I had my girlfriends looking at me, but what about our yoga class? You're going to a meeting, and what about our yoga class? Well, I choose the meeting because it's more interesting. And then I said yes to the meeting and no to my yoga class, and that's my choice. And I sometimes do miss the yoga class when I'm at the meeting, and vice versa. But I think it's very important that you are extremely conscious about the kind of choices, you do make, and not just get the breastfeed brain, because and then just one point, moms also need to make dads give them space to be dads.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. I can be honest to you. When I had my first child, I really didn't want her dad to take so much leave, because I had looked so much into that. I was looking so much forward to spending these months with my little baby daughter and getting to know her and just being full-time mom. That was the choice. And did it have consequences? No, not really. I just switched the pause or the internal, the interval button for a couple of months. And I was very frank about it, very open about it, and of course it's accepted. Once you just let everybody know that you are coming back, and you expect your space to be there, and then you grab the space.
Yep. Thank you. Well, thank you all, and thank you to Deputy Minister Bahari. There is a reception. Again, our partner, this is a partnership between New America and the Nordic Council, and we have done a number of events with the Norwegian government, with other Nordic governments, and now with the Council as a whole, and we're very thrilled to have that partnership. Thank you all. Thank you. All right, I've got to run. I'm going to say...